Hello, my name is Raymond Schnell, and this is my submission for production and developer work. I created the blockout for level 3 of Salamander. The level starts out with the player flying through space. Eventually the top and bottom screens will be covered with fire, while waves of fire and fireballs are going to be thrown out at the player, which they will have to avoid like obstacles. Over here, I have the documentation for the level 3 blockout. You can see the goal was to implement a basic build of the layout, and the second goal was to create the obstacles that the player has to avoid. As I said, the level starts out with the player moving through space, then fire will cover top and bottom of the screen, and fireballs will be thrown at the player. An interesting thing about this level is there is not an actual boss room. It's just an added continuation of the level. I also did documentation for the enemies of level 2. The goal was to document each enemy, how they act, how they try to attack the player. So this first one is an enemy that spawns in a line that moves diagonal along the screen. Every time it changes direction, it shoots a projectile at the player. Asteroids are actually spawned a lot throughout this level, and they vary from sizes, and all of them, the larger the asteroid, the slower it moves. However, when they spawn, every asteroid only moves in a straight path from where it is spawned. This enemy spawns in a line of 4 ships. They only move along the side of the screen and act as another obstacle and barrier for the player. I also created the level 1 enemies. The first enemy here is just a normal basic ship, just flies in a straight path to the other side of the screen. It doesn't target or shoot the player. This enemy is actually rather interesting. It's a worm that comes out of the ceiling of the level and wiggles around to try and hit the player. Over here we have an enemy ship that does not attack or target the player, but whenever it is destroyed, it always drops a pickup. This enemy spawns in several lines of other enemies and moves along the ceiling or the floor of the level, so that the player has to stay in the middle until the enemy is destroyed. And this is one of the environmental hazards of level 1. It's a large spike that protrudes from the ceiling and the floor to try and hit the player. The last documentation I did was for the ripple upgrade for the ship. It's another weapon that the player can actually use to try and hit more enemies with less attack. Because it has a wider radius, it can actually hit more things. It's also used throughout different maps. As you can see here in level 1, you can actually use the ripple to get through certain areas of the map to progress through the game. As you can see over here, I have my Trello cards. This is for the level 3 blockout. It gives a description of what it is. So it says that it's the rough layout of the level. It tells us what it does, like how the player interacts with it, and it tells how it affects the player experience. But since this isn't going to be in the final game, it affects more testers and designers than anybody else. We have our checklists over here for the Trello card. I also created Trello cards for the level 1 and level 2 enemies. Here's the Trello card for the first one. For the checklist, I have a checklist for each and every single type of enemy that you can find in level 1, as well as a separate checklist for documentation purposes. I have the link to the game feature and document right here. I didn't show it earlier, but I also have it right here in the blockout Trello card. This is my trailer card for the Ripple ship upgrade. It tells us how it affects the world, how the player can use it to try and hit multiple things, and that it can affect the actual environment that the player is in. And I have the checklist to say that it needs to be another weapon, there needs to be another projectile, and that it hits multiple things. Finally, I have a trailer card for my level 2 enemies. I go into describing the various different enemies and how they attack the player, how each enemy interacts with it, and in the checklist I also did what I did for level 1 enemies, which creating a checklist for each enemy that there is, as well as documentation for the a checklist for the documentation. As you can see, also my links do work. They go to all of the documents and work totally fine. Alright, that was my submission for the production and development work. Thank you.